My name is Linda Goforth Lyon. I'm from Gastonia, North Carolina. My grandmother, Nancy Charlotte Higdon Fuller Cochran, was from the Appalachian Mountains around Bryson City, North Carolina.
Speak loud.
My grandparents lived with us when they were in their 70s. They came to live with us in Gastonia from Bryson City. And one day, I was about 8 years old, my grandmother asked me if I was tired of having all these warts on my hands. And I said yes. And she got a dishcloth and a string and used the dishcloth, wiped my hands with it, and took the string and kind of went around and around my fingers where the warts were with it, and cut the dishcloth in half and cut the string in half and buried it under the front steps. And a few weeks later, all my warts disappeared. Oh, at the time, I thought that was rather normal for my grandmother. She raised all 9 of her children back in the backwoods of Bryson City, up in the mountains, and had to use what they had available to them. So herbs and remedies and poultices, and I wish I'd had a chance to learn a lot more from her, but I do know that that one in particular worked.
Was she religious?
Yes, she was the devout Baptist woman. She had memorized chapters of the Bible and could quote them verbatim to you. She was always wore dresses. She didn't believe in women wearing pants or getting their hair cut or wearing makeup, playing cards. She would just not. She just did not think it should be allowed in a house where she lived.
And some other stuff.
I don't think she ever saw it as witchcraft. I think she saw it as a means to what she needed to do in order to keep her family happy and healthy. And she was more like an herbologist, and she used medicinal plants and stuff to keep her family well. She had a child that died of pneumonia at a very young age. So obviously the medicinal herbs did not help quite like antibiotics would. But she was much older before she ever went to the doctor the first time. She birthed all of her children at home. It was just, she was way back up in the country and used what she had available to her. She followed the almanac, and she would only plant green beans on Good Friday. It didn't matter how muddy it was, because that was the only time it was going to grow. She would only plant her potatoes in February for some reason, and whatever the almanac said, that's what she followed.
What's the almanac?
Farmer's Almanac. It's a book that's put out for farmers.
Explain what
The Farmer's Almanac is a book put out for farmers that they follow, which helps with the growing season. And it has all kinds of information, and I've not seen one in years, but it has all kind of information in there that helps. It's not science-based. It's fact-based and seasonal-based. When she was young, she made all of her own food. She did churn butter. She knew how to make lye soap. She was a midwife. Her husband was a fire marshal. And they were just good old country folk. Where my grandmother grew up in the Appalachian Mountains outside of Bryson City, there was very few families. They were back up in the mountains. They would rarely go into town, and the town was just a little wide place in the road. I remember her talking one time about there being a big flood down the river that runs right down through the middle of Bryson City, and there's all these bridges across the river, and she saw a baby floating down the river. She said that was something she'd never forget. Had drowned in the flood. My grandmother was born in November 1889, and she raised her family outside the city of Bryson City, North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains. She raised 8 of her 9 children there. One died at about 2 years old. And she used medicinal plants and herbs in order to keep her family healthy. They raised all their own food, all their own meat. They ate everything, anything and everything they could catch or hunt, and raised vegetables and fruits and canned and dried meat, and churned her own butter, and had a working farm, small farm, and moved down here in the late 60s and passed away when she was 93 years old in 1982.
Anything else?
She was a teeny tiny spry little old woman that didn't take any crap off anybody.
Oh, yeah.
She's about 5'1" and just sharp as a tack, and her body just weakened. But she was just a spitfire. A lot like Christy. Just a minute. She married 2 times. She married a Mr. Fuller, and they had a little boy named Tom. And he passed away when he was 21 years old. And a year or so later, she married my grandfather, William Harrison Cochran. And they had 8 more children. And my mom, Willie Bell Goforth, is the youngest of her 9 children. My grandmother had very definite ideas and opinions about things when we were growing up, and she would voice her opinion one time and then she'd just be quiet. If you ask her for advice, she'd give you advice, but she didn't get angry if you didn't use it. She's very quiet. She's very laid back. She didn't get upset very easily, but when she did, it was over someone being mean to someone in her family. She's very protective, very loyal, but she did not take any junk off people. She was the kind of person that what you see is what you get. She did not put on airs. She was funny. She liked to laugh. She loved her family. She loved to cook. She loved to watch people cook. She always wore an apron and wore dresses. And the only time I ever saw her wear pants was when she went blackberry picking to keep the briars off her legs. She'd never cut her hair the whole time she was alive, so it hung way down her back, and she wore it in a long braid and pulled it up in a bun, and wore combs in her hair. Loved to dip snuff. That was just her favorite, one of her favorite things. She didn't smoke, but she dipped snuff.
Herself with nature.
My grandmother loved to be outside and garden. She loved to grow flowers and put up food, and she always had a beautiful garden. And she always helped us with ours and helped us put up the green beans and the corn and the peas. And she was a very hard worker. She didn't like to sit still. She liked to be busy and doing. And my she'd get my brother to go hunt squirrels so that they could eat squirrel, because that was one of her favorite foods. And she would always fuss at him if he got too much buckshot in the squirrels, because she didn't like having to pick out the buckshot.
Okay, is there anything else?
I just wished I'd have written down all those different things she used to talk about.